Hi all, my name is Daniel and I'm a platform engineer and open source enthusiast. I have been around in the IT industry since long before the advent of virtual machines, containers, private cloud, infrastructure as code, DevOps, platform engineering, and of course the public cloud. In my early days, if we wanted to deploy a new service, like for instance this trendy new concept called email, it was a big task. We needed to request a budget and had to spec and order a server from Dell. It needed 2 people to slot it into the rack, set up networking, 3 days of troubleshooting, and probably took around 3 months until the rollout was complete. I was working for a legal firm at the time, and deleted emails were a big issue as we could easily lose a case over a misplaced email. So I was asked to implement an email archival system. So we had to order another server from Dell to run email archival and spend a small fortune on email archival software. Then spam became another issue, and now we had to order another server. This process was slow and cumbersome and hugely expensive. And if we wanted 99.999% reliability, we had to invest in expensive clustering software, enterprise licensing, and shared storage. And usually the complexity of the clustering software made it less reliable overall, not more. Today, with the right knowledge, you can achieve all the above using public cloud in just a few minutes for probably a fraction of the fee. Back then, the concept of running a virtual machine inside a physical laptop using VMware Workstation was just mind-blowing. It took a long time for the industry to warm up to the concept of virtual machines, and even today some people are still hesitant to make the leap. Fast forward a few years and VMware came out with ESX and Equalogix came out with the concept of virtual storage, and I witnessed the birth of private cloud, and it was just amazing. Initially, it was tough to get my head around the fact that it was possible to share a single disk amongst multiple machines and that you could thin provision storage that you didn't have. But eventually the concept sank in. I still remember the conversation when our IT manager was trying to sell me the concept of virtual storage, which he had seen in a previous company, and I just couldn't get my head around it. Later on, I graduated to CloudStack using open source then as a hypervisor and struggled with ZFS stability. And then migrated to OpenStack, which was rapidly gaining popularity, and I struggled with Ceph performance. However, even with all the amount of effort required and the late nights desperately trying to recover a broken storage array, I would have never given up my own private cloud for the world. Meanwhile, whilst I was busy with private cloud, the industry had not stopped innovating. Whilst I was sort of asleep with old style development and deployment, the industry witnessed the birth of containers, Kubernetes, infrastructure as code, the culture of DevOps, and public cloud, which meant that all my skills in managing hardware, networking, and storage was now redundant. And I had to completely reskill and learn how to use other people's clouds instead. I spent 2 years studying for the renowned Cisco CCI qualification, and it was now pretty useless. I found the transition to public cloud as a service hard to stomach. I also noticed it changed the ways engineers use resources. Imagine living in a house where everything you do is metered and charged for. Every time you sit on a chair, open a door or window, or use a knife and fork. Now let's take that parallel a little further and imagine you were a parent with little children and everything they did was metered. Each toy had a different cost, and when they spilt their drink, you got a pretty big bill. Having a pet or central heating or shades on the windows was considered enterprise technology and priced accordingly, and only the wealthiest families could afford them. The rest of us had to live with what we could afford. You struggled to make ends meet as it is, but now you had all the stress of managing costs. If someone left a light on somewhere, the next month's bill would be eye-watering. The reality of metered billing changes our behaviour and stress levels, and not for the better. And developers deserve the freedom to innovate and be creative without the fear of making a mistake. I worked for a cloud consultancy as a DevOps engineer at one stage in my life. And the only platform we had to work on was the customer's production and dev environment. Whatever we did, we couldn't afford to break anything. This really slowed down development, as we couldn't just spin up a new environment, fork it, play around to our heart's content, and then destroy it. It just wasn't the done thing. The idea of developing directly on the customer's platform felt odd, yet it went unquestioned. My curiosity led me to explore Atlantis, a GitOps platform for Terraform, and I requested access to the company's highly protected AWS sandbox account. An oversight over a weekend resulted in a $500 bill and a disciplinary meeting the next Monday morning, killing my enthusiasm for further exploration. Developers deserve better than this. Students deserve better than this. We deserve the freedom to learn and play without the tension of cloud cloths hanging over us. Your cloud is your home. It takes years to understand how to use it, get it right, integrate it with all the various tools, and set up the ultimate internal developer platform. The amount of time and effort you need to invest in any cloud, private or public, is usually significant. And doesn't it make sense to invest in a home that you can actually own and use without restrictions? In many areas, a public cloud is amazing, such as serverless, global availability, instant scaling. But Kubernetes isn't one of them. Kubernetes is just so expensive in the cloud, and if you find a cheaper provider, performance is usually rubbish. I saw an article recently which looked at the cost of running a small cluster in EKS, and it came to around $800 per month. But what was interesting was the engineer couldn't actually work out the cost up front. There were so many different ways of being charged. The only reliable method of working out the actual cost was to look at his bill at the end of the month. Some companies receive cloud bills consisting of millions of lines, and only 3 out of 10 organizations actually know where their cloud costs are going. Yet, like lemmings, we are all blindly walking into this new reality called public cloud without questioning. Is there a better alternative? You know what? With all the headaches of managing private cloud, I still preferred the old way of doing things. With private cloud, due to the low cost of hardware, you tend to over-provision. Each team member has their own account, and it was just amazing provisioning a 16 CPU instance for to speed up your CI/CD pipelines without having to worry about costs. The platform was underutilized, which is typical for a development platform, so performance was fast and predictable, and there was no problem with noisy neighbors. Best of all, we were using the amazing ZFS file system as a backend storage system for our cloud, which meant the entire platform was being regularly snapshotted and efficiently replicated off-site. This meant developers never needed to worry about backup, and we constantly made use of this feature. However, when private cloud was a thing, there was a huge talent pool out there to support the deployment and management and troubleshooting of private cloud and its underlying technologies. But today, those skills are slowly being lost. How many engineers can today troubleshoot a spanning tree flood due to asymmetric routing or a faulty port? The question I would like to pose is the private cloud dead and there's no point trying to flog a dead horse? Or is there a case to be made to try and create the rebirth of private cloud? Many have thrown in the towel and given up. Take, for example, Cyber Corporation. A news article broke out recently describing the decision to shut down 17 data centers and 40,000 servers and move the workloads to the public cloud. There is some rationale to it. Google, AWS and Azure have spent billions of dollars creating the most scalable, reliable, feature-rich, easy-to-use, efficient cloud OS and platform, and their economies of scale are just incredible. Maybe the private cloud just doesn't make sense anymore. No more Dell, no more Cisco, no more data centers. These will all become relics of history for most of us, something that we will be able to tell our children about. If the cloud providers had their way, the cloud would be the beginning of the end for open source. Using a hosted service is always going to be the easier route. No developer would be blamed for choosing AWS, and consultants will always choose the easiest, least riskiest path, as they aren't paying the bill. The issue is that those making decisions aren't actually paying the bill, so the cost of public cloud and its real impact isn't taken as seriously as it should be. The thing is that cloud providers do not have our best interests at heart. They could make their platforms far more agnostic, adopt open standards, and make it easier to mix and match providers. But instead, they designed their platform to only play well with their own services, meaning that you are essentially forced into using their cloud for absolutely everything. This concept is known in the industry as vendor lock-in, and it means that we as customers are not free to choose the best technology for each task. Let's try an experiment and wander into fantasy land. Let's imagine a world that can't exist, that science tells us that it's impossible. It's only in our imagination, so it can't do any harm. And having unrealistic fantasies can sometimes inspire the craziest, most unrealistic realities to materialize. Let's indulge in a hypothetical scenario where the private cloud adopts some of the playbooks of the public cloud, such as adopting a subscription model, no setup fee, payable monthly, fully managed by a single vendor. This scenario would allow seamless operation across multiple providers or on your own service, granting freedom to choose and move between providers. The term is portability. This solution would put you as the customer in control. The data is stored in open formats, and even the replication can be to a customer-owned Linux server. I think we have to accept the current model of private cloud, and to some extent open source, has failed. Slowly, one by one, companies are migrating to the public cloud, disbanding teams and turning off the lights. And this is really sad. It's sad for the consumer, for the developer, and for those that believe in freedom and for open source in general. OpenStack was conceived as a community answer to the public cloud. And even though many thousands have contributed to it, and this is one of the largest, most successful open source communities, it hasn't been successful in its mission to create a mass adopted, customer-owned alternative to the public cloud. Quoting an article in the Register, research shows that it has had a mixed reception because it proved complex to deploy and operate. And a few companies remain enthusiastic about the platform, having mastered the complexity, but they do not see a shift to conquer new markets. So the score is AWS 1, open source 0, and the final whistle is about to be blown. Perhaps in overtime, we can rethink the private cloud and open source in general and somehow make the model work. Perhaps if we can solve the complexity to deploy and operate problem, we can breathe new life into an old horse. So let us rethink this and see how we can simplify things. Instead of offering each customer a myriad of options and designing each private cloud bespoke for each customer, let's create a simple fixed configuration using smart opinionated defaults that just works and is difficult to break. And whilst we're at it, let's make it simpler for novices by creating a great user interface and experience. Essentially, let's just copy public cloud and provide a great initial out-of-the-box experience. Finally, let's tap into the established low-cost bare metal server rental market by providers such as Hetzner and OVH so that it can be offered on a fully managed subscription basis. Let's learn from what works in public cloud, be agile and adapt. However, let's tap into the true values of open source by allowing the customer to own the platform instead of hosting it for them. So let's combine the good bits of public cloud together with the power of open source to create the ultimate sovereign cloud. The million-dollar question revolves around understanding the true desires of developers, regardless of the problems we address, the cost effectiveness we provide, or the level of freedom we offer. If developers ultimately prefer the public cloud, the momentum will be against us, leading to inevitable defeat in this battle. Let me show you that this question has been posed to developers in one of the largest surveys ever, and the response was an emphatic yes for the private cloud over public cloud. This Stack Overflow developer survey from 2023 asked 68,000 developers what cloud providers they favoured using a worked algorithm to separate hype from reality, and the responses clearly showed a desire to work with platforms and providers in the private cloud space, be it Hetzner, co-location, managed hosting, or others. So we have a clear conflict between what developers want and what the market data is showing. And that means opportunity. Opportunity to address this gap by somehow making private cloud work. This is the exact problem that Qumulus intends to address, simplifying and streamlining open source to make it accessible to everyone. In some ways, due to the rapid pace of innovation and the complex knowledge required to set up a well-run development process, and all the expensive enterprise tools that really make a difference, we have turned software development into an elitist culture where only the richest teams can afford to hire the right skills and pay for the right tools, and the rest of us have to fumble around just creating a simple CI/CD pipeline. You can save money doing it yourself using open source tools, but each tool is a world of its own, and creating a well-architected internal developer platform using open source is typically beyond the capabilities of mere mortals. If someone out there could streamline open source, whether it be the underlying cloud or the open source components that make a complete development platform and offer it for a fixed low cost, affordable out of the box experience, I think that offering could make a dramatic difference. This is our mission: streamline the deployment and management of leading open source tools and build a comprehensive unified development platform based on these tools, and make best practices and tools available to even the smallest development team on the tightest budget. We have started by offering low-cost private cloud for as little as $150 per month, but we don't plan to stop there. Hopefully we will trigger a trend that reverses the decline of on-premise and puts the customer back in control.